to the Impact Stream, your one-stop shop for verified and valid information about CSR, ESG, and sustainability right here in the UAE. My name is Sarah Shaw, and I am the CEO of Mejra. I'm welcoming here today Daniel Soloman, who's an entrepreneur and sustainability advocate dedicated to solving the global food waste crisis right here in the UAE and potentially globally. As the founder and CEO of HeroGo, the UAE's first food tech platform, tackling surplus groceries, he has transformed imperfect produce into affordable, high-quality grocery boxes while fighting food insecurity. That's a lot, Daniel. How do you do it?
I think it's more about impact, and I love the podcast. It's called The Impact Stream. So I would say, why do we wake up every morning? We all have to have a why. And my why is to close the gap between inequality and make sure not just we provide food to people, but high quality food that provides the nutrients that they need every day.
I think answering that why is absolutely critical to any social entrepreneur globally. And as someone who has won in the Future 100 as part of that list with the Ministry of Economy and Tourism, and also won first place in the Sustainable Impact Challenge with Mejra in 2025, how did you get to that point?
I would like to take all the credit, but I would say first it goes to all the team members who have been supporting our growth till date, and the customers who believe in us, who are getting their boxes delivered to their homes every week, and obviously, being recognized as being a great impact to us, being recognized as companies who's making impact in the sustainability space in the UAE.
Going through our verification process must have been quite rigorous for you, but it also meant that you had exceptional impact reports. Tell us a little bit about HeroGo's impact to date.
So in 2024, the way we look at impact is not just looking at the CO2e, it's also looking at, why did we start the business? It's all about social inequality. So one of the things that we do as a business is whenever we deliver a box to a customer, we commit in providing 2 meals to those in need. So we had to find the best way to capture our impact, not just from an environmental point of view, but for a social point of view. In 2024, we reclaimed over 400 tons of food. That's about 1,000 tons of CO2e. And that's about 1 million equivalent of meals that we've been able to rescue. And when we put that into context, it means food that goes to the landfill is not just food that goes to the landfill. It's value, both from an economical, social, and also from an environmental point of view.
Absolutely.
And this is what I think our audience, the consumers, they do appreciate, how to make the data relatable to them. And as we continue to grow, is to make that information available to the relevant authorities that might need the data, and also for ourselves.
And that's a critical point, the idea that social entrepreneurs can provide real data from the ground to policymakers, decision makers in the country. Could you maybe share an example of an exercise that you did in HeroGo that really supported in advancing the food waste crisis that we witnessed not only here in the UAE, but globally, really?
I think when we look at the stats globally in terms of the total number of food, 30% of every food that is grown gets wasted before reaching the consumers.
Correct.
And most reasons are because they're surplus, ugly, too big, too small. But particularly when we look at it for the UAE and the Gulf region, most of the food that gets grown, and not just because they're ugly, because most of the food that we eat here are already imported, about 80%, so they're already segregated. However, when those food gets imported, there's still change in demand, there's still surplus that they cannot sell because every importer is importing the same products. To solve for food loss, we had to look at the food loss problem differently for the region. Speaking to the importers, the food manufacturers, and the farmers, and we try to, get the data that relates to the particular problem for each particular stream. And one thing that we saw is the importer needs to understand the impact of their waste. It's not just about the money being lost, but also they need to see the economical, the social, and the environmental impact.
Correct.
And we went back to the drawing board, and there are lots of reference points that tells us that if a food lands in the landfill, 1 kg of fruits and 1 kg of vegetables, there's a CO2 equivalent for that.
Correct.
And there's also for water. So 1 kg of fruits being wasted is about, in terms of water equivalent, that's about 260 liters of water being wasted. So when we look at it from that perspective, we're starting to think that when we get food that is supposed to be consumed by humans, and we decide to throw them away because of the look, the shape, or if the importer thinks I'm just going to build waste into my margin as a competitive advantage, I'm losing money, and I'm also losing the value, which is not just the monetary value, but also the economical value.
Correct.
And the environmental value.
So you really looked at the entire value chain of the food, importation, distribution,
Correct.
and then repurposing. Tell us a little bit about the origin story of HeroGo. Where did it start?
So if I was to look at it, it's more going back to the why. I could remember, I've seen a lot of people in my first company. I had, this is my second company, my previous company, I had the opportunity to have an office in Africa and also in Ukraine. And when I travel between those parts of the world, people would always ask you, when they see you have a little bit more than they do, can you please give me money for food? Or give me money, and when you ask them what did they do with it, they say we need it for money for food. The case is very different. We live in a country that is so blessed. Even as experts, we go to brunches, we have great food on the table, but there's also this culture of people who feel because they have this surplus food, during brunches, for instance, there's a lot of waste.
Yeah.
And I connected both together, and I said, there must be a way to block the waste that occurs. And that was me looking at, the cooked food. I didn't even realize that this occurs on the raw side of the equation. And that's what drew me to the topic. And I said, there must be a better way to look at the food system. Because as I was doing more research, I realized that the raw actually has a lot more waste too, because this is a food that the consumers have not even seen before it goes to the supermarket, and there are a lot of standard. So the food system is broken just because of the way the food looks. And I thought, why don't we become a charity? Make sure that the people who need the food in Africa are able to get access to those particular food.
Yeah.
But I said to myself, but charity is not sustainable. And what I mean sustainable is, how do we design a system that we don't continue going back to the source to give us capital?
Correct.
And that's when impact came to mind. And impact meaning, how do you design a business that is for profit, but still able to make impact to the people who really need them? Correct. So of course we started in the UAE, and the goal is, to expand into other regions that we could make more impact. But the way we've designed the system is to learn from home, is to make sure that for every box that we deliver, we provide 2 meals to those in need, apart from the environmental data that we capture. And that's what's led to the why, making food more affordable, nutritious to people, and high quality grocery cheaper for those who would need to reduce their grocery bill by up to 30%.
So HeroGo is a predominantly tech-based platform. It is very much focused on reporting on certain parameters, and you also have a subscription-based model within HeroGo. Tell me a little bit about the beginnings of the tech platform, where you started, and then where you are today in terms of the customers that you serve, whether it's individuals or F&B outlets.
So we started just to validate our idea, like every startup, and this is about 3 years ago. And we started with homes, so consumers, people who cared about sustainability, and we started realizing that it's not just people who are rich who care about sustainability. Sustainability has to be explained to relate to people from different demographics.
Correct.
So what we saw is, people from, the Asian region, from Africa or other region who are not Europe, who are not already aware of the sustainability from an environmental point of view, is because they already have other priorities that they need to worry about. So when you talk about let's save the planet, for them, I'm not generalizing, but the way they think is, I already have maybe a mom to take care of at home. So I have more worries than, thinking about the planet. But when we make it more accessible in terms of the information to say, but the more you're able to save, the more you're also able to make more impact at home
and create value.
And you create value for, not just yourself, but now for your environment and also, for the families that you have back home.
Correct.
This is why, we see demographics who do care so much about, being able to get affordable groceries, apart from them going to get, junk food, but getting high quality fruits and vegetables or fruits into their homes.
Yeah.
So we have diverse customer base, and we started working with corporate clients. So like BCG, supported us. We worked with Total Energies, New Balance, and other corporate clients who are getting their weekly office boxes from us.
Amazing.
And this is a way for them to promote healthy living among employees and also, meet their sustainability goals and support, a UAE startup in the region.
Absolutely. I think even arguably just hearing you speak, there is even an opportunity to work with F&B outlets and restaurants for their produce to create their meals that go onto the tables of their customers. So the potential the potential is absolutely phenomenal. It's been around 2 months now since the Sustainable Impact Challenge. Yeah. And I'd like you to describe what shifted for you since then. What made the difference in participating in the Sustainable Impact Challenge?
We as a startup or in the startup ecosystem, I have to say, talking about impact, we were so excited that, Majra, is a platform that, talks about CSR and impact. And so when the application opened, we applied, but we didn't expect to be, even, shortlisted, just because, there's been so many other platforms or that talks about impact, but it was so exciting for us to be recognized as HeroGo. And in the last 2 months, I would say it's not just about the money. I think that it's about the impact, just being able to have that exposure, more to the company. It also means that sustainability is not just, a nice to have, is a top priority in the UAE. Absolutely. And that continues to grow. And we've definitely had so many inbound in terms of business prospects for other, customers who we're bringing into the pipeline.
Absolutely. And I think if you'll allow me, one of the things that I was very adamant about ensuring that we embed into the Sustainable Impact Challenge is the post-service. We really believe that customized one-to-one interventions with the founders of these enterprises was critical in ensuring that they utilize the amount in the most effective way and really look deep into their business models, their services, their products, to really ensure that they are sustainable.
Yeah.
For us, it's not about you winning this year, it's about you being winning forever within your mission. And food waste is a serious mission here in the UAE, as you know. Describe that moment when HeroGo was announced. What were the main feelings you got at that moment?
I would say overwhelmed, because it was as startups founders, we sometimes we get so in depth into what we're building, and it was a good time to we've won so many awards before, but particularly one that relates to what we do was a moment for us to, for me to stop. And I was like very overwhelmed, and I was excited, and I was also surprised, because even when we were doing most startups, all of us were called to be recorded on the video. I was like, when one of the cameramen called me to say, we're gonna record all the startups, I was like, I have to actually build a startup, and it's like, it's just going to take a few minutes. I was like, but, I have to build a startup, because that's how it gets really intense, especially when you're getting into a season where, it's going to be Eid, people are going to be away.
Yeah.
So, we wanted to make sure that, we still focus on, building, delivering value to the customers, and also preparing for Q3, which usually means people are away, so it's the time for us to look at the tech. How do we prepare for the new season, which is basically going to be up and coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just on that point, so we talked about the history of HeroGo, where you've been, how you've developed and grown as a business, how you're now expanding globally. Maybe one of the things we didn't really discuss is a challenge. And so as part of your journey with HeroGo, what was some of the most pressing challenges as an entrepreneur that you faced here in the UAE, and how did you overcome them?
It's a work in progress, and we as founders would always go through challenges. But I think changing mindsets that ugly vegetables is high quality, it's just the way it looks, or maybe because it has some bruises, it's still good. I think it's something that we had to overcome. Also explaining and being able to connect with the audience. And I think that from 3 years ago till now, when you meet anyone on the street and you try to tell them about, do you know about how to fight food waste? Do you think this carrot is wonky, so would you eat it? They would probably say yes, because a lot of people are more aware, and it continues to grow. And the second is trying to also change the mindset of people that impact does not have to be a charity. Impact is a real business, and it makes real money. It does have its own challenges, and we're competing against normal businesses. So if I have to employ someone, to build, one of my engineers for technology, I'm still gonna have to compete to pay the same amount that traditional, business or in other sector would pay. But when it comes to the measurement from maybe the investors, they don't measure it that way, at least in this region, because they have other priorities in terms of different sector. And this is where we as founders, or particularly us, is to continuously try to say, but this is a tech business, this is real numbers, this is real revenue, and this impact,
genuine impact,
and this is genuine impact, and then you make use of the information. And I think that has been one of the ways that we've been able to overcome the challenge.
If you were to give a piece of advice to any social entrepreneur here in the UAE or even globally, maybe if you can direct your face to the camera and say, what advice would you give them?
Particularly, I think we have to look at what is the main problem, like what are we trying to solve for. It's not just something that works in another region that would work in the UAE. It's about ensuring that localization plays a big part into the topic area. But if there's a real need, because I think one of the things that I've seen is a lot of founders think food waste is such a big issue, so I want to start it, right? But then it's to look at what are the alternatives that already exist, and see, are they really solving for the real problem, and what am I bringing in to help solve the problem, and would it make money? Because at the end of the day, to be sustainable also goes back to the unit of economics. Am I growing my margins? Is there a lot of margins? We as a business, it's a journey that we had to learn, and we had to continue to adapt. We're still adapting to make sure that, to be sustainable means that, we have to stay alive, and we have to reinvent ourselves and pivot from time to time.
So, Daniel, if I was to interview you 5 years from today, and I asked you, so what have you achieved, and how is HeroGo today? What would you answer?
I think it goes back to the why, right? Like, why did I decide to embark on this journey, and why are other people joining us on the journey, or the believers? It goes back to making food affordable. How do we solve hunger? And I think that we're creating a system that actually works for the consumers. They're joining us on the journey, but it's how do we get 4 million meals, every month, and 4 million meals to people who would actually need it, not just people who are low income and they're able to eat, but people who are not able to have meals. And that's about 48 million meals a year. And I think at that particular point, in 5 years, we would have said, we're contributing to, the 800 million people who are going to bed without a meal, and we're solving for it. And as we continue to scale, is how do we drive that? And I think that's the why. And to make that a reality, we need to continue to make sure that the business units of economics make sense, consumers continue to get value, and they join us on the journey.
Absolutely. And maybe just as a final question, what's beyond 2025 for HeroGo? What are your future plans?
So there's a lot. I would say, the value of preserving food and fighting for food loss, goes in multiple verticals, ensuring that people are able to, try out different snacks. Of course, we're expanding into Europe in 2025, and we've been very busy for our expansion as we also continue to expand into Saudi Arabia. And the goal is, ultimately, if we're able to achieve our goal by making sure we have more users on our platform globally, we're able to take our impact not just in the high GDP countries like the UAE or in Europe, but also to Africa, where real impact also would occur, especially for people who want nutritious meal. And how do we ensure that we create a system where the high GDP countries, where customers are getting their boxes, but while they're getting their boxes, they're making an impact into regions such as Africa and Asia, and that's the goal as we continue to scale.
Daniel, you're amazing. Honestly, I am so inspired
Thank
with
you.
everything that you have done, everything that
I'm
you will
humble.
continue
Thank
to
you.
do. You're a great human being
Thank
who
you.
really identified a very specific area of potential work and made a turnkey solution that to the world seems simple and straightforward, but you have had such an incredible journey.
Thank you.
And we are honored in Mejrad to have you with us as part of our family.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for hosting me on the podcast and for your time.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Daniel Soloman, the CEO and founder of HeroGo, right here at the Impact Stream. As you know, we always welcome guests into this podcast that really have created phenomenal impact in the UAE and continue to do so, not just for home, but outside of home. Thank you so much for joining the Stream for Sustainable Impact, and welcome to Mejrad.